Hi, my name is Ellen. I am a speech pathologist, and today we are going to be looking at classroom visuals for communication and how we can use these to support our students. What are classroom visuals? Classroom visuals are evidence-based. There's a large body of evidence for specific classroom visuals as well as just using visuals as a whole to support our students with communication needs. They need to be tailored to each student. This doesn't mean we're redoing every single visual support. It just means that it needs to be tailored for each student. For example, you might start with a daily schedule for the full day, but then this can be broken down for students who may need it as a first then visual or just the morning session. Some examples of classroom visuals, visual schedules or timetables, first then boards or first then boards, first then next boards, visual routines or instructions, lanyard visuals, signs and labels, turn-taking visuals, conversation starters, choice boards, checklists or to-do lists, visual timers, and social stories and narratives. And as you can see, the list of benefits is just as long. They help our students and their communication partners interact with each other. It supports understanding of language as well as expressive use of language. They can be used across any situation, not necessarily with the same tool being used across every situation, but cumulatively, visual supports can be used to support any situation. You can be tailored to specific situations. They can help provide structure and assist with transitions. This obviously helps reduce students' anxiety, which can reduce associated behaviours such as difficulty with transitioning. They support students developing independence. So an example of this would be a visual checklist or sequence for a task that you were completing in class. Similarly, this supports students' executive functions. So this is more like using a checklist for what does a student need to remember to put in their bag at the end of each day, or remembering to check off things when they are proofreading an assessment. All sorts of ways that it can be used to support executive function. It can reduce task-related frustration. So again, having a way that students can communicate whether a task is too easy, whether it's too difficult, be able to communicate which step they're up to in a process. All of that reduces frustration and the related behaviours that we may see. As I said before, it can decrease anxiety and can actually support improving students' memory. Where and when would I use visuals in the classroom? Everywhere. All classrooms should have them. Consider if your students need visuals that you take on the go, such as taking a first then board to the library when we take the class down, so that you can communicate not only first classroom then library, but when we're in the library we can swap them and say first library then classroom. This helps with sticking to schedules and routines as possible by having them everywhere in the classroom, having them easily accessible. We know from research and just common sense, we know that if something's accessible, it's going to be easier to use. We're going to be more likely to use it. Providing advance notice when a routine will change is a good example of when we should be using, for example, social stories or a first then or a visual schedule to let students know that their routine or the plan will be changing. Another example of where you might use a visual such as a social story would be for situations where you know students will be distressed or they might be difficult because there's a change in routine again. So we can make a social story around fire drills, lockdowns, special events, things like that. We can also have specific ALS boards to support students for those events. When we're designing visual supports for the classroom, there's lots of things that we need to consider. The main things are purpose, a student skill, and accessibility. So purpose, naturally the most important. Why are we making visual support? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Will it be used to teach routines? Will it be used to reduce anxiety around transitions? Is it for one student? Is it for the whole class? Is it a reminder of the schedule? Is it a prompt? Or is it of the main support the student's receiving? All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Also considering a student's skills. For example, can they attend to a full visual schedule, or do they need a first then board? Can they only attend to those two immediate items? Do they respond best to real objects or photos or icons? The majority of students will respond fine to symbol-based visual supports, but some students will need photos or objects. Please talk to your speech pathologist if you are unsure where your student sits on that continuum. And lastly, accessibility. For example, does your student need a high contrast communication aid? Do we need to consider that a student is in a wheelchair and therefore needs to be able to access the visual schedule on their wheelchair tray? Do we need to consider that maybe having a visual schedule on the whiteboard is too hard to see for a student with a visual impairment? Do we need to consider that we may need to include signs for a student who is deaf? Things like that. We're now going to go into some specifics of classroom visuals, what these look like and how we might use them. A visual timetable or schedule is one of the most common classroom visuals you will see. It has a visual display of all the activities in the day in the order that we're going to be completing them. They feature typically a picture or a symbol, as well as the word of the activity. For example, photo of a library or symbol of library, or music class, English, spelling, writing, and it will have the times next to the activities, ideally with a picture of a clock as well. These help students to understand and organise their world, so understanding the passage of time over a day, understanding that once we finished one activity, we'll be moving on to another one, understanding what they're going to be doing that day and what's going to be expected of them, further reducing that anxiety. It clarifies expectations around specific activities, so how long we're going to be doing an activity for can help reduce some, again, behaviours. If a student is engaging in a non-preferred activity, we can show them and say, it's only for this period of time and then we're going to be moving to something else. It can help with transitions by supporting students to know what to expect coming next. It can represent a whole day or parts of a day. So again, considering whether a student can attend to a whole day, whether that's helpful or whether it's more beneficial to break it down to just the first half of the day, just the morning session, even within a lesson, say an English lesson, you might break it down into first we're doing reading, then we're doing some writing, then we're doing some phonics. Features of a visual timetable schedule are often removable. We call these manipulables, and they can be removed obviously to switch out different activities, but also might be removed to put in a finished bucket, for example. So a student can quickly refer back to the board and say, okay, I know we're halfway through the day because the top half of the board is in the finished box. I know that this is the activity we're doing currently. This is what's going to be next. Similar to any of our visual supports, using photos, words, symbols, pictures, whatever is going to be most accessible to our students. Here are some examples. So an example of just one of morning session versus the whole day, and then examples of manipulables. So you can see that they have the word and then a symbol as well. Very similar to a visual schedule is our first then, or first next, and these support students to complete activity what they're doing right now and what they're going to be doing immediately after. So these can be thought of as a step down from a visual schedule, or they can be a tool in their own right. First thens are generally used with students whose ability to attend restricts the use of a full virtual schedule. For students who can attend slightly longer and to more items, you might use a first then board or a first then next board, which has 3 items: what we're doing now, what we're doing immediately next, and then what we're doing after that. These can be used to support students' behaviour, again, by showing relationship between action and positive outcomes. So showing, once we complete this activity, then we'll be moving on to this one. What's super important is that we're not using first thens as a behaviour tool. We're not saying first do an unpreferred task, then you get to do a preferred task. Both tasks should be considered equal, and we should be communicating that to students. So instead of saying first you have to do maths, then you get to play blocks, we should be saying first we're doing maths, then we're playing blocks, keeping our language very neutral. Here are some examples. They generally are pretty simple. You can draw one on a whiteboard, you can have pre-made ones, very easy to make, similar to visual schedule. We'll typically have a symbol and the word of the activity. Visual instructions and visual sequences are a little bit different. These provide a visual for steps to follow to complete a task or an activity. These support students to complete a task in a necessary order. We saw these pop up everywhere in COVID times with really specific instructions for everyone of how to wash your hands for the correct duration of time, how much soap to use, how to make sure you're thoroughly cleaning your hands. That would be an example of seeing a visual communication tool out in the wild of real life. And we can have those same tools in the classroom. So these are really helpful for teaching students new skills, but also for supporting and reinforcing and just providing an additional tool to support students to maintain that skill and have some independence in being able to look at what the step they're doing right now is, as well as the next one, and plan ahead. The number of steps is really dictated by the task. Obviously, more complex tasks are going to require more steps, but also considering whether a student can follow and attend to 2 instructions at a time, or whether they need things broken down a lot further. Again, photos, pictures, symbols, words can be used really depending on the student and the situation. You might include a tick box or again a finished box when a step is completed, so a student can either cross it off or move it to the finished box so that they know where they're up to. Lanyard visuals, these are used pretty widely. Most schools have a set of visuals that they use. They are on-the-go communication supports. They shouldn't be considered robust communication system, but they do have their place in being able to communicate on the go those single words and phrases. Some examples of more specific ones: you might have a student who prefers a different symbol to the standard set, so you might have your own set of lanyard visuals for a specific student. You might have specific ones such as I feel frustrated that typically wouldn't be on a standard set of lanyard visuals, but for a student who frequently feels frustrated and that's a point of breakdown in communication, you might have staff use a I feel frustrated on a lanyard visual. Signs and labels. This is again another example of where we see visual supports everywhere for everyone. If you go to the shopping centre, there's signs with words and pictures of specific shops or amenities. Same thing for in the classroom. We can reduce students' cognitive load massively by ensuring that things are labelled, have pictures. For example, if we're asking students to put away their glue stick at the end of every activity, it just makes it easier for everyone if the box where the glue sticks live has a picture of a glue stick and is labelled. Turn-taking visuals, these are really helpful for students who have difficulty waiting or even conceptualising the concept of it's not my turn, it's someone else's turn. So they can be as simplistic as this one in the middle with the round circle of my turn, your turn. This can be helpful for teaching. You might have a teacher's turn, your turn, for when you're modelling something and you want students to be attending to you versus when you want them to complete an activity themselves. The example with the pipe cleaner would be you moving the bead along to show that time's progressing and it's getting closer to their turn. For a whole class level, you might have a larger wheel where there's multiple students' faces and an arrow in the middle, and it shows whose turn it is, and then it's rotating around to everyone. Conversation starters. These are slightly less common, but are still useful for students who find them beneficial, and they provide students with support to start conversations, either with peers or familiar adults. They can be tailored to specific situations, such as starting a conversation in a coffee shop or helping to support order a meal, or they can be more general. A choice board is kind of broken down from an ALS board or an aided language simulation board. It offers the options available, so always make sure that if an option isn't available, for example, if normally a choice would be to go outside during lunchtime but it's raining, make sure you take that option off, otherwise that is going to cause meltdowns, obviously. When a student is making a choice, make sure that a timer is set or a number of repetitions is agreed upon before the student engages in the activity. Otherwise, again, that's going to lead to behaviours. Some examples of where you might use a choice board is in a sensory activity, letting students pick the specific sensory activity they would like to do. Another example would be for their specific regulation strategies, having a choice board with the tools that they use most frequently so they can self-advocate and request a specific tool. Again, consider the choices that you include. They need to be available and possible, and know your student, know what they are likely to need to be able to pick from. A checklist or a to-do list, very similar to a visual instruction set. It has a list of tasks to do and you tick them off. For students who can read and don't need visual supports, this can just be written down with words. For most students who'd be creating these resources for, they will need the text as well as symbols. Visual timers are great, and again are one of the more widely used visual supports across schools. It shows the progression of time or a countdown in a visual way that is easier to conceptualize compared to a clock face or just numbers. Time is quite an abstract concept for a lot of our students, so a visual decrease is helpful, seeing something visually get smaller as we get closer to the end of our time. Examples of where to use: counting down to a student's turn, countdown to lunch, how close to home time. It's important to use them across preferred and non-preferred activities. So don't only use a visual countdown when we're wrapping up a preferred activity, otherwise the student is going to associate the negative of I'm being told I have to finish something that I enjoy with the visual timer. So use it for non-preferred activities as well. If they really dislike writing, setting a 5-minute timer and saying, well, we only have to do it for 5 minutes and then we can move on, again, kind of keeps it as a neutral tool. Here are some examples. You can have printed ones that have a start, almost done and finished, sand timers. Some students will stim with these, so again, take your students' needs into consideration. The Mouse Time app is personally one of my favourites, and I have a lot of success with students who have that negative association with any sort of timer that has a number. I find that they really like the mouse timer. Any sort of kind of turnable countdown that importantly has that coloured section that shows the decrease in time. There's lots of videos on YouTube that have visual timers. If all else fails, you don't have anything else, you can use the one on an iPad or an iPhone, but make sure that the ring countdown is visible as well as the numbers, because that's what we want a student to be looking at, not the numbers themselves. Social stories or social narratives. These are a tool to help describe a context, skill or achievement concept. As I said at the top, the goal is not to shape behaviour with these. The actual goal is actually to share information about an activity that's upcoming to support a student to have an understanding of what the activity is, to reduce anxiety around said activity, and be able to support a student to be empowered to engage in that activity. This is an example. How do we start using visual supports? Skills your students need and things we should be considering. Students need to be able to focus on a visual and have joint attention with you and the visual. This doesn't necessarily mean we need a student to be looking at the visual, but they need to be attending in some way. They need to be listening or taking information in, and often our students are taking more information than it may appear on the outside based on their behaviours. Ability to understand meaning of a picture or symbol. We need to take into consideration that when we're introducing a visual, it's new to the student, and most of our students who are using these supports for do have language and communication difficulties, so they're going to need more repetitions to build that understanding and build that connection. This is a picture of the playground. When I see that picture, that means we're going to the playground. It's just going to take them that bit of extra time. And our students need to have a desire to communicate. They need to have some ability to engage in communication. Again, even if we're not at that step, we can be modelling that engagement and reaching out to our students to support that engagement. Modelling most consistently across all applicable situations. We're modelling when and how we want the students to use them. So again, considering the purpose of the visual and when we're going to be using it. Is it something we're taking on the go? If we're expecting the student to use a choice board in the playground, we need to model using it in the playground, not just in the classroom. What do you need to make visual supports? It's pretty flexible. You can make a visual support out of pretty much anything, depending on how good your drawing skills are. But generally I say that having a camera or symbols, Velcro, laminator and laminating sheets. Just a note on that, matte sheets are generally preferable to reduce glare, particularly if you have students who have a vision impairment. And then the easiest way is to organise things is on a computer with PowerPoint or Word, Canva, Boardmaker. It really doesn't matter which specific program you use, it's down to personal preference. Here are the general instructions of how you would make a visual schedule. This is the example that we did on the day that I originally presented this PD. And wrapping up, points to remember is that modelling is very important. Again, we need to be reminded ourselves as adults that our students will take longer to learn how to use this support, so modelling consistently and modelling intentionally is super important. Remembering that more stressful situations and when a student is more dysregulated, the need for visual supports increases. That's not when we should be introducing new supports. We need to have already introduced the supports, already done a lot of modelling so that when we need them, when a student is dysregulated, they can use them to communicate in that moment. When a student is dysregulated, that's not the time to be introducing or teaching a new communication method. We need to consider a student's age, mobility, cognitive skills, vision, etc. To ensure that our classroom visuals are accessible and actually useful. Decision to use visuals shouldn't be tied to the expressive language skills of a student. We know that expressive language skills tend to be a bit lower than receptive skills, and that can be particularly true for non-speaking students. They may appear to have low expressive skills, but this may be a reflection that they don't have access to robust AAC, or that they just don't have the opportunity, they haven't been given the opportunity to communicate and demonstrate that expressive language skill. Regardless, our students all have the human right to understand what is happening around them, what's happening to them, what's being expected of them. So presenting things visually makes it more accessible for a student, even with a receptive language difficulty. They should be used for as long as the student finds them useful for. So a lot of students in a special school setting will use classroom visuals of varying degrees for the majority of their schooling years and probably beyond. Considering using them at home as well as at school, that can be a discussion that we can support families in. And we want to keep in mind that if a student is successful with visual supports in place, we don't want to be taking the visual supports away once they've had success. If they're having success because they have the right supports in place, it's unfair to take away what's helping them succeed. And they should be used in every classroom, so there should be consistency. A common concern that staff have is that it takes a lot of time to make resources. It doesn't have to take a long time to make visuals for your classroom. There's a lot of very quick options. There's a lot of pre-existing options. Boardmaker has lots of templates and lots of pre-created activities online, for example. PowerPoint has lots of quick icons. It really depends on the exact tool that you're making and for what purpose. Also good to keep in mind that once you make a resource, you have the resource. So what might feel like a big investment of time at the start is actually building up your overall amount of resources. So there's lots of resources that I spent maybe 20 minutes making a really in-depth social story, but I've now been able to use that social story for 20 students. So overall, I've actually saved myself a lot of time. Rather than making individual social stories, having one social story that I can give to multiple staff members for multiple students. And here are all the sources for this presentation. Thank you for watching, and all of the best with using visuals in your classroom.